See if you could save.
This is AIM Agenda. With me now, we've got the Parliamentary Secretary to the Prime Minister, Josh Frydenberg in Melbourne. Good morning, Josh. And in Adelaide, we've got the Shadow Parliamentary Secretary for Health, Amanda Rishworth. Amanda, good morning to you. Thanks for joining us. I want to start off with Tony Abbott, first of all. He's in Davos at the World Economic Forum and laying the platform for the G20 and Australia chairing the G20 later in the year. But he's saying both settings and the strength of the economic situation globally is important for Australia. He's bringing it back to a local focus. Let's hear a little of what he had to say in Switzerland overnight.
I'm here because the people of Australia expect their government to be working for a stronger national economy and a stronger global economy. Because a stronger national economy and a stronger global economy means more jobs for the people of Australia.
Josh Frydenberg, the Prime Minister also said that he wants practical outcomes when it comes to the G20, Australia chairing it this year with the Leaders Summit in Brisbane in the second half of 2014. Are practical outcomes realistic, Josh, given you're talking about 20 world leaders in a room? It's always hard to generate uniform thinking, isn't it?
Well, firstly, Kieran, Australia, must be said, works very effectively in multilateral forums, whether it's APEC or the East Asia Summit and now the G20. And people like Peter Costello can take a lot of credit for developing the G20 into the group that it now is. In fact, Australia hosted the finance leaders from the G20 back in 2006. And now Brisbane will host the G20, which will be the biggest meeting we have ever held. More than 6,000 delegates in terms of media and world leaders, and not just the 20 biggest economies in the world, but also the United Nations head and the OECD and the World Bank head. Now, what Tony Abbott has said is that we need to focus on practical outcomes. He will outline in his speech in Davos on Thursday a number of areas where we think work can be done. Now, that's trade. Because we do believe in the multilateral trading system, and if we can get countries to work more closely together, we can get progress there. Tax, because there's an erosion of the tax base and lack of proper profit sharing between countries, particularly in the context of this digital age. And so it's in Australia's interest to get some collaboration and movement there. And then there's an infrastructure deficit.
Given on trade, you look at the Doha trade talks, which remain stalled for so long. Getting countries and leaders together and having making practical progress on any issue, let alone trade, is tough. So while he's talking a practical agenda, the point I make to you is that is very hard to deliver in those sorts of settings, isn't it?
Well, actually, there was a ministerial meeting in Bali just a few weeks ago, which was a multilateral round. And Andrew Robb represented us there, and there was some movement. And there are things that you can do behind the scenes to get greater cooperation on trade, not just a multilateral trade agreement. For example, closer collaboration in terms of customs and those sort of areas. So there's many facets to the world trade agenda, and it has to start somewhere. And we're better placed to start than at a meeting of people of the likes of Barack Obama and Xi Jinping from China and the other world leaders. So that's one area. Tax is another, and infrastructure, Kieran. In fact, Australia has a lot to offer the world in terms of infrastructure financing. We have big superannuation funds. We have global banks like Macquarie. The OECD has estimated there's a $50 trillion infrastructure deficit between now and 2030, and what the G20 will be looking at is ways in which to enhance the financing of infrastructure in various countries, and Australia will be a big beneficiary of that if it was to move forward.
One of the comments Tony Abbott made on foreign policy closer to home, Amanda Rishworth, was on Indonesia. He reminded President Yudhoyono that the stopping the boats and that issue is a sovereignty issue for Australia as well. He's correct in saying that, is he not?
Well, look, what we're seeing from Tony Abbott since he's been elected, and Julie Bishop and Scott Morrison, is constantly putting at risk our relationship with Indonesia. Indonesia is an important country to Australia. It's important that we have a constructive and strong relationship. It's important in regional security. It's important in stopping people smuggling, and it's important in trade. Josh was mentioning trade. Indonesia is incredibly important and a potential increase in our trading partner. But what we're seeing from Tony Abbott, Julie Bishop and Scott Morrison is constantly putting at risk our relationship with Indonesia. So I think it's really time for Tony Abbott, Julie Bishop and Scott Morrison to start actually working on how they focus on getting a constructive relationship with Indonesia, because so far, since they've been elected to power, they've constantly been putting at risk this relationship.
Josh, Tony Abbott said that SBY, of all people, should understand that sovereignty, the countries take their sovereignty seriously. Was that sort of language a bit blunt, a bit more blunt than you normally see in international diplomacy?
Oh, not at all. Look, SBY and Prime Minister Abbott do work well together. Australia and Indonesia do work well together. These are difficult issues on the border protection situation, but we can't divorce the current issues that we're dealing with from the context in which the Abbott government came to power, and that was after the Labor Party unravelled what were successful border protection measures and led to more than 50,000 unauthorised boat arrivals. Kieran, something had to be done. More than 1,000 people had lost their lives at sea. So what we are doing, what we have done, is to bring the policing role, the intelligence role, the naval role under one central command, under Operation Sovereign Borders. It is difficult work, it's challenging work, but we need to send a very strong message that Australia is not open to the people smugglers, and we will go back to the Howard-era policies. And look, that's the fact of it, Kieran. That's the fact of it.
I want to look at a related issue, something I asked Erica Betts about. These claims that have emerged via the ABC that asylum seekers have suggested that the Navy had beat them and inflicted burns on them. Amanda Rishworth, what do you make of these claims? This was apparently, according to the asylum seekers' version, when they were being forced back onto a boat and towed back to Indonesia.
Well, look, I think that it's up to Minister Morrison to provide the details to the Australian people on this, and in fact many related issues around asylum seekers. What we see is Scott Morrison. So,
do you think the claims are credible? Do you? Is that your sense of this?
What I'm saying is we need the information, because Scott Morrison continues not to provide information on issues around border protection, but what we also see Scott Morrison do is hide behind the Navy. The Navy is a very professional organisation, and what we see previously with the incursion into Indonesia's sovereign waters is Scott Morrison hide behind the Navy, and he needs to come clean. These are his policies that he is implementing, and so we need to get the information from Scott Morrison. But on the whole issue of asylum seekers, he needs to actually be a lot more transparent. Tony Abbott promised a transparent government, and we're just having hiding behind the Navy from Scott Morrison.
We saw the Minister, Josh Frydenberg, Erica Betts. He said a bit earlier in the program that he thinks it's too early to come down definitively one way or the other, although he'd be leaning towards believing the Navy. What's your view on that? Are you more categorical in your response?
Oh, look, Erica Betts is absolutely right. I do reject the notion that there be any inappropriate behaviour on the part of our Navy. They're a very professional force, and they're doing a very difficult job. So we stand right behind the Navy, particularly around these unproven allegations.
Although he did say it was too early to say definitively that the claims are wrong. He did make that point as well.
Well, until we're proven otherwise, I would totally reject any assertion of inappropriate behaviour on the part of the Royal Australian Navy. And can I just say to Amanda, she wants a fact. Well, from Scott Morrison, he did say publicly that the last unauthorised boat was on the 19th of December. That was more than 4 weeks ago.
Well, unfortunately, he also told
Amanda,
the Australian people he rejected the notion we had incurred on Indonesian sovereign borders when he was briefed on the same day that it actually occurred. How
Amanda,
anything this minister has to say. Come on.
Amanda, your government was characterised by defeatism and failure on this issue. We are having some success. Finally, there's a long way to go.
Josh, it sounds like you're being a bit more definitive than Eric Abetz was, though. You're willing to go a bit further in saying that these claims are unfounded.
Well, what Eric Abetz and I are both saying together is until proven otherwise, we do not believe in any wrongdoing on behalf of the Royal Australian Navy. So Eric Abetz is absolutely right. Until proven otherwise, we do not believe there was any inappropriate behaviour by the Royal Australian Navy. And we're at one on that issue.
Josh Frydenberg, Amanda Richworth, appreciate your time. First time for the year 2014. Thanks for being there. We'll chat to you soon.
Thanks, Kieran. Thanks, Amanda.